Hi, and welcome to Industry Night with me, Nycci Nellis, the show that takes you on a deep dive of the happenings of the hospitality industry. Every week, I get to talk to an incredible array of talented people about their passions and their professions. Now, if you're new here, hi, welcome. A little background on me. I've been covering the food, beverage, and hospitality scene for the last 20 years through a variety of outlets like online, TV, print, radio, podcasts, and social. 20 years of the list, areyouonit.com. It's the online zine that tells you everything happening in the DC restaurant industry. Every Sunday, tune in live to Foodie and the Beast, DC's only food and wine variety radio show. We are celebrating 15 years this week on air. And of course, you follow me at NYCCINELLIS. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Thread, LinkedIn, YouTube. If there's a platform, you're following me. Okay, so it has been a minute because I've been out of town for about a month. And if you pay attention to my Insta feed, you know I have been traveling. I have had the incredible good fortune to travel through different areas of Italy. A little bit of work, a little bit of play. But we were back to Sardinia for the first time in a year, because I was fortunate enough to go last year. But then we also hit Milan and we also hit Como. So normally at this part of the show, I take you on my travels and my eats and tell you all the things. So I'm not going to take you on the whole trip because that would take up the whole show. But I am going to take you through Northern Sardinia. So just a little bit. Can we first talk about the airline La Compagnie? So La Compagnie is an airline. It's a business class only airline. It only flies to Paris, Nice, and Milan. So here's the deal. From now on, I'm only flying to Paris, Nice, and Milan because it is the most lovely, beautiful way to fly. Everything is business class. The staff is lovely. The food is created by a Michelin star chef. It's how flying, I think, should always be. I don't know what happened to the airline. That's another show, but this is how flying should be. So La Compagnie, woohoo, we love it. It was amazing. And then now let me tell you where we went to Sardinia. So last year we did half north, half south. This year we were like, south is lovely. I never need to go back. We love the north. So we stay in a town called San Pantaleo. It is a gorgeous little hill town. It looks like super easy and homegrown, but it's super chic and beautiful, and the food is amazing. We stay at Petra Segreta, which is the secret rock. It is a little outside of San Pantaleo. It is a Relais Chateau property. It is beautiful. The staff is amazing. If you go, have Franco, the concierge there, take care of your every whim, because he will do that for you. He set us up every day. So for those of you who haven't been to Sardinia, here's how it works. You get up in the morning, and then you go to a beach, a different beach every day. And in Europe and in Sardinia, which is in Europe, it is so civilized. There are chairs there that you can pay for, and you arrange them in advance. So you get to the beach, you're not schlepping your life with you, and you sit down, and there is usually a towel, a chair, and you get to sit at the ocean. And it is just how it should be everywhere. All the beaches in this country should take note. Anyway, we went to a different beach every day. The other gorgeous thing about it is that there's like these restaurants on the beach, and they really don't look like much. And then you walk in, and they're serving on china and silver, and it's lobster pasta and clam pasta and fresh fish and pasta. I mean, basically it's pasta at every meal with, in Sardinia, seafood. So every day we would be on the beach in gorgeous crystal blue waters. Our favorite beach is Cala Granu. It's just beautiful, and the restaurant there is just amazingly delicious. Although we do love JBeach as well, and the JBeach restaurant is just crazy, crazy good. In the evening, we really stayed close to San Pantaleo because driving around there, the roads are super curvy and super tiny. So you want to stay close, especially if you're drinking any of the Vermentino or Cannanau that they pour in Sardinia. We did hit a couple of wineries, and we did one day drive all the way across the country, across the island to the other side to go to Alghero, and took a boat trip of the cliffs, which if you have the opportunity, it's really spectacular. And again, all of that is on my Instagram. So we ended back at Petra Segreta. We did our last night at the Michelin-starred restaurant, Il Fuoco Sacro, which is at Petra Segreta. It just had a spectacular, lovely evening. You can see that also on Instagram. There's a fabulous photo that this couple who was sitting behind us took of David and I. I actually posted it today because it's my 27th wedding anniversary. So take a look. Have any questions if you want to go. I am delighted to help all of you. Next time I come on air, we're going to talk Como. Lots to discuss there. Lots of good food too. Okay, back to life here because we have so much else to talk about. So if you're paying attention, you see that I'm not sitting in the wine lair because I'm not shooting the show there. I'm in a brand new, gorgeous setting, the beautiful Capitol Jewish Museum in downtown DC. Now, some of you who have been watching or listening to me for a long time may remember that I had the team from the museum on last year. The museum was not opened, but as a way to get people excited about the opening, they threw this pretty fabulous festival last October. I was there. I interviewed Michael Twitty. The sun was shining. The food was delicious. All the people were there. But the museum was not open. So guess what? It is open now. It opened its doors in the spring of 2023, and it is glorious. Now, last year I heard from some people, another Jewish museum. So let's just get this out of the way. The Holocaust Museum is not a museum celebrating the life and times of Jewish people. It bears witness to the tragedy of the Holocaust. It has its place. The Capitol Jewish Museum explores the Jewish experience in the national capital, and it really is inspiring and inspires visitors, to connect and reflect. It is beautifully laid out, and it's so thoughtfully curated. So I'm so excited because I'm going to talk to some of the people today who helped make all of that happen. So sitting next to me, I have Malki Karkowski. She just started here, but she is going to tell us all the things today. She is the Chief Advancement Officer of the Capitol Jewish Museum. I have next to me here Bettina Neuder Brown. We've practiced her name 50 times. She is the lead designer of this museum with the Smith Group, and I can't wait to hear how she executed the vision and made it happen. And then Sarah Levitt. Sarah Levitt, the easiest name I screwed up. So she is the curator here, and I've actually spent some time with Sarah today just walking around looking at all the magnificent exhibits. So we're going to get to all of it. So I'm going to start with Malki. Hi. Thank you so much for joining us. I know this is totally throwing you into the fire. Absolutely. Your announcement is today, launches today. So for people who don't know about the Capitol Jewish Museum, what is it? Why is it? Let's just explain what it is.
Sure. So the Capitol Jewish Museum, or the Lillian and Albert Small Capitol Jewish Museum,
right,
really came because there's a beautiful cultural landscape here in DC. Mm-hmm. And I think we realized that it really needed to be rounded out with a museum that focused on the Jewish community. Like you said, all of these museums have a wonderful place. They share important history, and they provide so much wonderful education. And we want to help enhance what that landscape is through the Lillian and Albert Small Capitol Jewish Museum.
Is that what am I calling it wrong?
I just want to give recognition to our founders and their great-grandparents who they wanted to honor.
I love that. Okay, so let's talk about the founders. Who were the people, there's all these people involved, obviously, who donated money, but what was the initial vision and who had it and what were they hoping for here?
It's a great question. And as you know, I am very new, so right. I'll fill in a little bit of the history, and there's so much more to be shared.
Okay.
So actually before it became the Capitol Jewish Museum, it was the Washington Jewish Historical Society.
Right.
And that started in around the mid-60s when the original Addis Israel building, which was built in 1876, was about to be torn down. And a group recognized the importance of it as a historical landmark and decided that they wanted to maintain it and make sure that it was secure. And it has moved places from time to time. And then I think the vision of what a museum in the DC area would mean really started to take hold. And it honors not just the Jews who were in DC, although so much of the Jewish community started right here in this neighborhood. It really honors both the Maryland suburbs, the Northern Virginia suburbs, and
the metro
DC.
area,
exactly,
right? I mean, I think if you live in the DC area, you really include Virginia and Maryland as all of it, right?
100%. Yeah.
And what did the society do, and what was the original thought process, really? Like, yes, there are Jews in this city, just like there's Jews in lots of cities, but what were the stories that they were looking to tell, and what were they hoping to convey in putting a museum together?
That's a great question. I actually wonder if that's a better question
for Sarah.
Possibly.
Okay.
But I do think that what it has turned into is so much of what you've said, which is an opportunity for people, not just members of the Jewish community, to connect with the artifacts, the items that are in the museum, reflect on their meaning both in their lives and possibly in the broader community, and act and understand how they can help make the world a better place in whatever way, shape, or form that they want. And so really it is a museum, right? There are things that are concrete, but what we're hoping for is the actions and behaviors that come from it to really enhance what the world could be.
Well, it seems to me like it's an opening for a conversation, right? That it's really about getting people to think about all the different communities that are here in DC.
I think that's great. And one of the values that this museum was founded on is the value of machloket, which is the Hebrew word for conflict. And being in DC,
I feel like Jewish people are filled with conflicts. As a Jew, I can speak to that. Go ahead.
And DC is very much known for that,
obviously.
And I think the whole idea is that we can have conflict, but in a meaningful, productive, and constructive way. And so if we can be a part of that and help lead to better conflict, to what we call machloket l'shem shamayim, of conflict in the name of heaven, and to really go towards that effort to act to make the world better, that's what we're really trying to do.
Okay, I love that. All right, I'm going to go to Bettina next, because Bettina, you've executed the whole thing of what we're sitting in today. So who did you work with initially? How did you come on board, and how did you help create the vision?
Yeah, so we started Smith Group, my firm. I'm working in the cultural studio, and we are really involved in cultural projects in the city. This project, we actually won through a competition that took place quite some time ago. And we entered this competition really with the idea of helping the museum understand what the museum can be here on the site. It's part of a bigger development. I'm not sure you know this, but we are sitting basically on top of a big garage. And so there were a lot of issues to deal with for the architect to really coordinate the vision of the museum with the realities on the ground.
Oh, so wait, let me ask a question, because obviously there's been a tremendous amount of building in the area we're in right now.
That's right.
Capitol Crossing has just opened up. So was that part of the things you had to deal with as you were? Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we had to coordinate, with the other elements that were going on on site. So I was really working on this project from the beginning. Concept phase, you really try to understand the program side of the project. You try to understand the really important mission points that the museum wants to express in the building. And of course, we want to take care of the most important artifact that the museum really has, which is the original synagogue. Yeah.
So had you ever worked on something like that before?
No, but that's part of the fun of working in the cultural studio, because every project is different and every project has its own challenges.
So how did you go about integrating the original synagogue and then sort of creating a museum space? Because building a museum space is not like building an apartment building or, you know,
Right.
a house,
Right.
or an office space. You know, you're looking for sort of a roadmap that people can engage with
Right.
within a space. So how did you go about incorporating the synagogue and then creating the effect that those in charge wanted for the feel of, and vibe of the museum?
Yeah, you know, the synagogue was always one of the focal points. The original location before it was here was up the street, and there it was just sitting wrong. So one of the
Wait, it was sitting wrong?
it was sitting in the wrong orientation.
Okay.
It's supposed to face east, and it didn't.
Oh, and it didn't.
It
Right, you
did
mentioned
not.
that earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was, you know, I mean, that was just a given for us to really, you know, we want to place the synagogue right. We want to showcase the synagogue.
Okay.
So that just really led to its location where it is right now at the corner. You can really see it. It's right across from the building museum. It's just going to help really create and, you know, add life to this area that is really developing and filling in with, you know, with more people and more institutions. So that was really our starting point. You have a program, you really want to draw people in, you want to touch the existing building lightly. So, you know, a light-filled lobby space was really what we wanted to have. So pieces were falling into place just by given, you know, what the program is, what the site constraints are, and what you really want to achieve with the building.
Okay. And so once you had that in place, were there ideas or things that you or your team brought to the table that you were like, this is what's happening in some other museums? You know, these are the kinds of areas, or whether gathering spaces, you know, like I think about the room we're in right now. Were recommendations made, or were there people who were like, no, we want a lab, we want X, we want Y?
Yeah, this is something, you know, in the initial phases, you really work with the museum through the program. You know, it's really a collaborative interaction. We want to make sure that, you know, that the right square footage is provided for the exhibits, of course, the support spaces. We're working with exhibit designers. You know, it's a big team effort to really make sure that this is done right.
Right.
And of course, the museum had, you know, has a mission that we're supporting.
Right. So you're helping execute that and create that and make it work.
Yeah.
So Sarah, I want to bring you in. So as the curator, I mean, you work with everybody.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about sort of the initial vision and how it evolved, right? Because when did you all start working on this? Was it 2016?
So people have, yes, I joined the project in 2020.
Okay.
So toward the end of 2020, and folks had already been working on this like 5 years,
right?
Something like that. This kind of project has a long lead time. It's a big team, lots of consultants and other folks that had joined in to try to figure out what it would mean to change from a historical society into a museum.
Okay.
Which is a pretty big transition, because a historical society, was the Jewish Historical Society of Greater Washington, was set up to, using words like, celebrate the contributions of Jews to Washington, D.C. They actually, you know, you mentioned the DMV. They were much less interested in that. They were very focused on the district, which is interesting, of course, especially in Jewish history, but in any kind of urban history, and where you see
sprawl, when you see people
sprawl, you see white flight out of the
Yes.
district. Certainly is one of our big stories here, and the Jews were certainly part of that story. So in order to tell that story, you have to follow them into Maryland. You can't just leave them at the border. So part of our, when I joined the project, and part of the reason I was brought in a couple of years ago, was to really help figure out how to tell some of that nuance, how to tell some of those stories that maybe aren't about celebrating the contributions, but are kind of about looking at the community a little more broadly. What sorts of choices do people make that maybe we don't want to celebrate today? And how do we talk about that in a museum? And that's kind of my favorite thing.
Right. Well, because as a curator, you like history.
Yes.
And you want to tell, but I think it's really important. I think you bring up a very good point. There's plenty to celebrate, but you have to look at the history of, it's a celebration of the Jewish people in this area, but it doesn't mean everything is worth celebrating.
Right, absolutely.
So how did you guys go about, I know you came in a little later, but can you talk a little bit about the process of how the timeline was put together, how the different exhibits were put together? Like take us on a walking tour.
What's funny about this walking tour, of course, is it's mostly in my living room because, of course, it was 2020 and we were all working from home. And, of course, we didn't have a building yet. So we had a construction site. So the first times that our staff came together in person was like on a hard hat tour of the building, or we met outside in a couple locations, right? If y'all remember 2021, good times. So
mask in place.
Right, exactly, absolutely. And all the pictures of the early staff were all in their masks. And I think it's interesting. I think later on we'll look and see how the pandemic influenced the building of telling of history, the building of museums in that period. It was different. And part of that was, it was a lot of talking with my team, my curatorial team, definitely not just me in my living room, but we were on Zoom talking to a lot of different people, a lot of different historians. We were reading a lot. We were reading oral histories. We were trying to put together that timeline. You talk about literally the timeline of like, how do we get this done in 3 years in order to open, but also the timeline of Jewish history. And what does that mean when we say Jewish life in Washington? Who are we talking about? And how do we get those voices that maybe we hadn't heard from before? The Historical Society definitely had certain people whose stories they were telling and materials that we had from them. But the Jewish community is so much bigger than that, than those groups. So that was part of our job. And how do we do that on Zoom? was a challenge. But
meanwhile, it's open.
Meanwhile, it's open. Yes, it's so exciting.
So let's go back to that. So you have a timeline here. It's part of the exhibit.
Yes.
So when you enter the museum, let's go through how you would give me a guide. Yes, through. Where would I start? How would I go? I walk through the doors and
the beautiful light-filled atrium.
Yes, beautiful.
To your point, yes. And we look
with
at
a little nosh corner.
Absolutely,
that's what I saw first. I was like, ooh, is there food here?
Of course, you can have a snack, but not in the gallery.
Yes.
And then we finish our snack, and we of course, you see our most precious artifact, the historic synagogue first, and we walk into the ground floor of that synagogue. And what's kind of nice about that symbolically is, of course, that when that building was used as a synagogue, that was where classrooms were, and that's where meetings were held. And if you've ever been to a synagogue meeting, I wouldn't recommend it, but
everybody has something to say.
It's contentious. It's long. I'm involved in my synagogue in a lot of committees, and you see that's where the work happens, right? Is in those types of conversations. So that's where we put the exhibit that takes us through history from 1790, when the District of Columbia was established as a city, and the first Jewish family was here in the 1790s, early 1800s. It's very tiny little community. We call that section not quite a minyan because they didn't even have 10 people. And we to say some of the prayers, of course. So we take it through all the way. The last thing on the timeline is the opening of the museum in 2023, which I guess is a little cheeky, but we put ourselves right on the timeline.
As well you should. Okay, so we start there. We get a timeline.
Yes, and the other things in that exhibit talk about the growth and movement of Jews in this area. Different. We focus on a couple different people and careers and grocery stores and restrictive covenants, and all of these things get taken together. Funding for funding for Israel, dances, high school sweetheart dances and sororities, all kinds of stories that take us all the way through the pandemic. We have a matching mask and talit, kind of ending that section to look at how the Jewish community worshipped through the pandemic. So that's the history, really, that chronology kind of digging in.
Which I really love, because I think it's important to see the progression of how, when people arrived, everybody is very sort of myopic about their own history, about just kind of assumptive about whether or not, like my family most of my family, not all, but most of my family came over in the early 1900s, except my father's grandfather's family all came over in the early 1800s. And, I think everybody has these presumptions that everybody came over at the same time.
And DC is an interesting story. It's the first immigrants here were actually not off the boat from Europe, as we say, but mostly from other American cities, and they came here for jobs and looking for work. And the big migration into DC, of course, is during wartime. That's when the federal government expands. So during the Civil War, during World War I, and especially the New Deal brought a lot of Jews to the city, World War II. So that's when you kind of see the big population growth.
Wow.
So that's kind of interesting. So it's not, we do have a samovar, but it's not really that old Ashkenazi speaking Yiddish story. Of course, that's part of the story, but it's only part. And we have a lot of different communities that come here.
And then, so once we leave the timeline, where do we go next?
Go upstairs to the second floor of the historic synagogue, which is where the sanctuary was, and I guess still is, although it can be used in lots of different ways. How we're using it now is during museum hours, as we're showing a film, and that film it's kind of a visual experience on 3 different walls, and that talks about the experience of the synagogue itself. So the synagogue was in that room from 1876 until 1908 when the congregation moved across town, and then the building was sold and it was used by all kinds of different groups.
Right, it was like a barbecue place,
it was a barbecue,
right? I love that with a pig out front.
Yes, that's everyone's favorite, the neon pig.
Right.
It was several different churches used that upstairs room, a lot of businesses downstairs. So we do have all of that information. If anyone's curious about the soap company that was here, we have all that.
I love that kind of stuff. I think it's very cool. All right. Okay, so we're going to leave the sanctuary.
Yes. And we get to walk across a bridge, which was, I think Bettina's going to talk about that, this beautiful linking the old building to the new building. It made the second floor of the sanctuary accessible, which it never was in its whole history. Of course, it just had those tiny little stairways.
Okay, so I'm going to put a pin in you for just a second because I want to talk about the core exhibit that we'll get to.
Okay.
But Bettina, why don't we bring you in and talk about the vision? Because we talked about how you had to work with the synagogue, but now connecting this relic with the newness. What was the vision, the materials? How did you guys go about executing the look that's here today?
Yes. So one of the design challenges for this project really is connecting the synagogue with the new museum, which is a structure that is about 7 times larger than this really small synagogue. So we were really challenged to make this all integrated with each other and really make it feel like a whole, but still providing the space for the synagogue. So it's really, the project is really about connecting old with new. And the bridge is part of that connection. You literally, walk from the old space through the very new space to the exhibits that will tell you more about the story. But we also attempted to do this on the exterior, especially with the materials as well, the connection of old with new. So, it's a simple structure. We have brick, we have glass, and we have metal for the roofs. And all of these simple materials get reinterpreted in the new structure. The brick, which really tells a little bit of the story of the synagogue. If you look at it, it's not the same brick. It's like very different brick parts everywhere, talking about different windows and the changes over time. That gets reinterpreted in the terracotta paneling on the synagogue, on the museum, of course.
Right.
So
right at the entrance.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the building is basically clad in terracotta, which is the interpretation, modern interpretation of the brick. Then the glass filled, the glass curtain walls in the lobby is the reinterpretation of the windows of the synagogue, and then the roof of the synagogue, the metal roof, gets re-envisioned in a red ribbon, picking up on the color that really connects all the different shifting volumes of the new museum with each other. So we were really conscious of making this connection between old and new.
That's fascinating because if you're just walking through it, you're just visually appreciating it, but knowing what went into it makes it that much more fascinating.
Yeah.
It's just like I'm crossing the bridge. I'm like, that's so pretty. But I love the intention that was a part of everything you all did to give the effect
Yes.
that came across. Okay, so we crossed that bridge. The beautiful bridge.
When we came to it.
Yes. So let's talk about the core exhibit and what people can experience in there, because there's some really interactive activations in there that really make it fun and engaging for really all ages.
Hopefully all ages. Yeah, we have something for everyone. So we have some tactile things, some more analog interactives, and then of course we have 2 tables, interactive tables that are a little more electronic, that definitely people flock to, and gather
when
around.
When people see video, they're like, what is that?
Exactly.
I mean, you would think they've never seen a screen in their lives.
They're literally holding one, right?
I know, right. But I mean, it's attractive.
Absolutely. And the tables work in different ways, and they can work. One of them, the Seder table, we welcome people in to have basically an argument at the Seder table about.
You've been to my house, I say.
Exactly. The table will play a little video about certain stories of liberation that have to do with Washington Jews, and then it will ask questions that some have to do with illegal immigration or protesting and things that people they answer it, and then they're asked to kind of discuss amongst themselves at the table, which is fabulous to actually watch visitors doing that after so long.
Well, so can we talk? I love the big video screen, the big video table in there that sort of pinpoints where grocery stores are, the map of sort of the nomads of Jews in this area and where they went and how they traveled. Whose idea was that? What was it's such an interesting thing to be able to watch. Can we talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It was not my idea, although my team did.
You would take credit for it.
Sure. Then it was definitely of course, my team. We did all the work and the inputting of the information and working with the company Potion out of Brooklyn, New York, that designed it and programmed it. But yeah, it does a couple things. That table is kind of multifaceted. One of the things that you were watching when we were down there was it goes through the decades. So it's kind of playing on a loop going from the 1860s until the 2020s.
Right.
And it pinpoints all of the synagogues in the area and the Jewish institutions. So like cemeteries, Jewish Community Center, Hebrew Home for the Aged, things like that. Those are in different colors, so you can kind of see it. And so as the decades roll, the synagogues, there's more of them, and they move north. And you can really see that happen. You can see it moving north along Rock Creek Park, which is right through the center of the district. And then you can see where it's 1940s. They're all along that list. And then that what do you call it? The street.
Yes.
And then access, that's the word I was looking for. And then the 1950s happened, and so the first synagogue in Montgomery County was in 1948, and so by the 1950s decade, boom, all of a sudden, you can see the movement into the suburbs, the white flight into Montgomery County, and then that just builds and builds and builds for the next couple decades, and then you start to see the growth in Northern Virginia, so you can actually kind of watch movement and growth happen on the map, which is pretty
fascinating. Cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, so that's fun, and also instructive, especially if you see what's happening and can build a context, which hopefully downstairs you've gotten some of that context to bring upstairs with you. The other thing you can do, though, there's iPads that a huge database, and we're building it all the time, of hundreds of, you mentioned grocery stores, of Jewish-owned businesses. Of
course I said grocery
in the
stores.
area.
I said grocery stores? Let's talk about them.
And liquor stores we talked about too.
Yes, we did.
We talked about also how beauty shops was more of a Sephardic Jewish trend to open beauty shops instead of grocery stores. So you can see some of those. You can also see the Jewish institutions and the cemeteries. Of course, the cemeteries don't move, but everything else moves
They
around.
better not. I mean,
but there's more.
There
of
was
them.
a movie about what happens when you move cemeteries and build on top of them.
Don't do that.
And then, so those are the 2 core exhibits.
So there's the identity part. There's 4 sections in there. So there's the map table. There's the Seder table.
Right.
And the map table is also on the walls. We talk about community and where we find where the Jewish Washington has found community. Then we ask our visitors, where do you find community? Do you have a work community? Do you find community through where you might eat or play sports or things like that? And then we have the identity section, which has the cubes where people can pile up.
So the cubes are like big blocks. I mean, I just have to sort of interrupt. And it wasn't until you started moving them around. They have photos of people from the area over the years, and then there are words. So you want to sort of say who you are based on the words that you pull, right?
Right. So it could say activist, mother, Democrat. I'm just using words to describe me.
Right.
But you can pile them up. We have one. So they get some say scientist or I'm definitely not. But we have my favorite one, which says museum lover. We have all kinds of. We do have a curator one. We have a bunch of lawyers and federal workers.
Sure.
So all kinds of things. And the idea is that people can pile them up and kind of flip them around to find words that they think describe themselves. And it's kind of fun also if you come with a friend or somebody you know or someone in your family, you can build towers for each other and see if you pick words that, that people like. I had a visitor the other day and one of her friends used the word feminist to describe her and she was like, oh, I don't know if I want that one. So that was kind of, and then they had a discussion about it.
Oh my God, we're about to go down a rabbit hole about why she doesn't want to be a feminist.
Exactly.
But okay.
Super interesting. That's my favorite thing when when I'm in the gallery and I see people like either arguing about something that they see or discussing it or I didn't know that. Those are love words. Then the last section in there is called Tikkun Olam, repair the world. And we talk about some issues that have been important here in DC and kind of look at the issues from a DC perspective and from a Jewish perspective. So we have climate change and immigration rights and voting rights and reproductive rights, look at abortion from all different.
Well, actually, I thought it was really interesting, and I'm sort of curious where you are on this, because politics does sort of feel throughout the museum. I mean, I know we're in DC, but it is really interesting, all the politics that you see throughout the museum. And it's not just because some Jews are in politics or they're lawyers or lobbyists, but it's because of life and history. So it's so much more a history museum, really, than anything else. So because I asked you when we were in the museum, and we were talking about where people, you said a woman was very upset about the use of the term apartheid.
This morning, yes.
This morning when they were talking about Israel and the Palestinian issue. And then there's abortion, and then there's all these things that are, not that they should all be political issues, but they are.
Sure.
So I was just sort of curious, like how do people respond to that? What are the reactions that you hear? What did you think when you first came here? Were you surprised by it? What were your thoughts? And Bettina, you, I mean, even just putting this museum together, how that makes you feel. You want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So we, we worked closely with back then, so the Historical Society, and we got a little bit into what the exhibit spaces really want to, show, and how we can support it. And to me, it's very what's the right word? It's very satisfying to come here now that the museum is open and see all the different pieces coming together, and really see what the exhibit space that we as architects really just, we just provide a warm shell for the exhibit designer really to fill out. But, our hearts are all in there as well. So, yes, so having a museum that focuses on history that really comes all the way up to today is very interesting. It's great to work on.
Yeah, I agree. It's exciting. And how did you feel, since you're the new one here at the table, seeing all the issues that are brought up? Because as Sarah said, it's a museum, it's a celebratory museum, but not everything. We don't get to pat ourselves on the back for everything we've done.
Sure.
So how did you feel about that? And what are some of the responses you get from some of the people who come in and maybe say, why are we talking about abortion here?
Sure.
Or why are we talking about civil rights here? I mean, as Sarah and I had a talk, I was like, yeah, Jews think they're big civil rights, people. And she's like, not so much.
Well, they do think that.
Yes. No, they do think that. I think that, but I got a big education today.
So the museum may have a type it likes to hire, because I am very much in the same ilk as Sarah, where I actually think that there is such a breadth and a range of how people engage with their Judaism and see how it connects with America and what their identity is, that I think that's beautiful. I think that's important. I think that is exactly what we should be encouraging and embracing. So for me, thankfully, I haven't had that many people who have given me that kind of feedback that it's a negative thing. But I think for me, it will absolutely be something that I will appreciate the feedback and also share how important it is. I think for us as a community to be able to engage with conflict and with conversation, because I do think it's something that's not necessarily happening across America, and to be a center for it is amazing.
You see somebody's looking for
They're my
something.
next door neighbors growing up. They're right outside.
Oh my God, I love it. That's hysterical.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Don't be silly. I love it. That's darling. Okay, well, hurry up with you so you
Yes,
say hi
no.
no.
So funny. I'm so sorry about that.
No, I love it.
But it shows how lovely and deeply embedded I am in this community. How wonderful it is. How it has been such a core piece of who I am. And I hope that when others come and see the aspects of it, they connect with it. Again, part of our mission. They understand what it means for them. They reflect on what it means for them, and then act, right? Like, there's a lot of stasis. There's a lot of inertia. There's a lot of digging in because you feel like you already know, or that this is truth or fact or whatnot. And to be given that opportunity to consider something else, to consider a different perspective. I mean, one of the things that I think about is there's a saying, this phrase in Judaism, Shiv'im Panim HaTorah, that there are 70 faces of the Torah, and that really you could take any different perspective, look at it in different ways, and find a truth there. And I think that's both so amazing and also allows us to have those conversations, and hopefully in good faith.
I love that. I hope you're right.
Yeah.
But I'm sort of curious, was it hard when they were putting together these exhibits? Was there a lot of arguing about people being like, no, we want to look good here.
Yes.
That's not the story we want to tell.
Correct, yes.
Okay. So how did you deal with that?
Well, I think we've all seen it happen all around us, where the big concern right now is that in teaching history is that some things in history, people are worried they're going to make people feel badly about themselves. And I don't want, like, you go to some of these school board meetings, I don't want my kid to feel bad about themselves.
Instead of really learning from the situation and being like, maybe don't do this in the future.
Correct.
Okay. I think we're all on the same page here.
Okay. And that's, as a parent, as a citizen, as a person, that is upsetting.
Right.
So I've long felt that my job, I've been a museum curator more than 30 years. And, as my career has evolved, I've really gotten much more interested in museums as a place to challenge people, a place to maybe talk about things that are a little more complicated and hard. I don't mean that the goal is to make people feel bad about themselves, but I do mean that the goal is to make people think a little bit, get back on their heels a little bit. Well,
maybe if I'm hearing you correctly, it's you don't know it all.
Right.
That's why you're here.
Absolutely.
You're here to learn something. And I mean, that's so important.
I actually think it helps people. I think if you're taught a certain history when you're younger, and then you start learning the opposite of it, or different aspects of it, it becomes very difficult to then hold both of them. And so to be able to recognize that there's nuance when you're younger, and maybe you don't know the breadth of that nuance yet, but you start understanding, you build up, just like with children, right? You build up their understanding so that when you get to the point where they are capable of fully understanding it, they have the full story.
Sure.
And be able to
well, at least the foundation.
Yes, and
right?
grapple with
because
it.
We're always building on it. The
Absolutely.
story doesn't end, right?
And grapple with it appropriately instead of just whitewashing it and then being like, this doesn't even make sense. There's no consistency, or it's hypocrisy, and then you often lose that opportunity to make it a fulsome story.
Well, since you mentioned children, I'm sort of curious what the vision is about age appropriateness, about sort of the programming you have here. I mean, I'm looking at a bunch of children's books over here. So talk to me a little bit about engaging with visitors who come in. I'll take it from anybody.
Yeah, come in, all of the
Okay.
children, all of the grown-ups, all of everybody. So we have a new person starting next week to really enhance and build up our youth and family programs. We're really excited to get school field trips in here. We haven't had that opportunity yet, but that's something that's coming. We're looking forward to that. So we do have this room, which is an opportunity for, hopefully, for grown-ups to talk to each other and also to talk with the children they came with, to really dig into some craft activities, some looking towards social justice projects in this room. And obviously, yes, and we do have a big library, so they could come and read.
And what about from your perspective?
So I have firsthand experience in that I actually brought my children here.
Okay.
And we came in and there were, of course it's difficult for a 5-year-old, a child who doesn't read, to really engage with, for me, what's probably one of the most interesting aspects of the museum, which is the timeline and really the different parts of it. But there's enough video, enough interactive, that it really gives them sufficient reason to kind of understand and start that process of learning. And, there's so much here that the intention and the hope is that people come back and continue to come back. And you might get to this, but we have special exhibitions. And so that's going to be a rotating
Well, that was going to be my next thing. So we have a special exhibition here right now, right? Can we talk about that?
Yes, right now through the end of November, we have an exhibition visiting from the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice. It's about her life and her work, outlines a lot of the court cases that she worked on throughout her career, both at the ACLU and then, of course, on the court. So that is it's a nice opportunity to feature one Jewish Washingtonian. Future exhibitions will probably...
Who died on Rosh Hashanah, but yes.
And we talk about that. We added... So the exhibition's been traveling for many years. We did add a case at the end with some objects from our own collection, including a collection that our collections curator actually took from the Supreme Court after she passed away, which were Post-it notes with hundreds of Post-it notes with notes that people had written from the heart after she died. So we have some of those up in the exhibit.
Well, so what we haven't really talked about was the curation. I mean, we talked about the exhibits and what you have here, but how'd you go about collecting all this stuff? I mean, where did you get it from? How did you get it? How did you bring it here? I mean, can people still give you stuff?
Yes,
like, how does it work?
Yes, we are constantly collecting. Our collections curator, Jonathan Edelman, is upstairs right now, up in our archives, going through, he gets calls every day. He digs through people's attics. He cold calls places when, for example, we have a number of things in this collection that he just reached out when he noticed the Hebrew home for the aged it hadn't been at its site in Petworth for 40 years, and the city of Washington was in the process of renovating the building for elderly people. He called up the construction site and asked about the Jewish star in the window.
Oh, yeah.
And what were they going to do with it? And they were like, well, it's sitting out by the dumpster. He literally put on a hard hat and went down there and found it.
Amazing.
And took it. And then it had to be, the structure of our building had to be kind of changed to accommodate it. Were you like, great,
that's terrific. Thank you.
Exactly. So that was fun. He has called local businesses to ask for things. But yeah, people have reached out to us now. Of course, some of it is like, you didn't include me in the exhibit. And so that's an opportunity to say, okay, well, great. Why don't you donate some things? And we do have a brand new, as of last week, we have a brand new case in the lobby, which we can rotate in and out. So last week we put in materials from our collection that all were from federal workers, of course, in advance of the shutdown last week, which didn't happen, but we still want to shine some love on federal workers who are constantly caught in this net by working here. So that's something that was super fun, and we could just put it in a case downstairs. So yes, we want to rotate things in that case, and we have the opportunity in our special collections gallery as well.
Okay, so how many special exhibits do you have right now? Just the Ruth
Bader Ginsburg. So that's on the third floor.
Ends in November.
ends at the end of November.
Do we know what's coming in next? Are we allowed to talk about it?
I think we are.
I hope so.
Sure, let's talk about it.
Nobody's saying no, so let's go with it.
Yeah, you can break the story. That's
Okay.
exciting.
Breaking news.
We have another visiting show coming next May. It's called I'll Have What She's Having. It's the story of the delis in
Jewish
Oh,
delis.
Jewish
seriously?
delis in America.
Oh, I
So
can't wait.
It's another
You
visiting
will have
show.
to come back.
I'm going to have to come
Exactly,
back.
and that's perfect because it's all about food. We do one wonderful thing about that show is if the show as it traveled around the U.S. doesn't have anything about Washington D.C., but we had our interns working all summer finding as much as they could, and we have people working on it now too. Much as they can about delis in this area, so we will be featuring our own DMV
so
delis
much
as well.
Fun. So much fun. I love it. All right. We do have to kind of wrap up, even though there's so much more to discuss.
Mhm.
So I would love for each of you just to sort of talk about individually what the museum means to you, what you hope visitors experience, and then how we can find you either on Instagram or whatever. So let's start with you.
Sure. The museum is, I think, as someone who grew up here and really feels a connection to the community. I have lived in other places, and there's just something special about the DC area. I feel very proud to be from here, to kind of be able to say it's my home. And I think the museum really represents that well. And I think it's such a wonderful opportunity to kind of show what it is to be Jewish and part of the DC community. And I just, I think also as my time here continues, I'm gonna build that love, right? Like it's almost like, say this about my husband, you love them a little bit more as you get to know them, hopefully. And
It's like, I've been married for 27 years. You're losing me.
congratulations,
Thank
by the
you.
way.
Okay, but seriously, so
I'm just waiting for that to happen to be able to, fall in love even more with what I've seen.
okay, great. And Bettina, how about for you?
Well, this museum for a long time was my baby, my one and only baby. So, a lot of thinking goes into it. I know every single, corner of the building. So
Right.
it's very near and dear to my heart. And it's just always so validating to see it opened and people are using it, and it's being handed over to a new parent in a way.
But it must be really satisfying.
Yeah, it is.
Right? To come
It
in
is.
today, see people walking around, and you being like, did
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It's very,
Yeah.
it's
And it's
terrific.
always, you dream something up on paper, but the way you feel in a building is always very different. And so you want to create buildings that make you feel good when you enter, that are welcoming. And I think,
Mission accomplished.
pat myself on the back a
Very
little
good.
bit.
Okay, and Sarah.
Yeah, well, I'm not from here, but I've lived here almost 25 years, I guess. But that's not my connection. I think I'm much more interested in this place as a jumping off point for conversation and for moving into the social justice space and thinking about what museums can do kind of in this void as we're destroying history education. I think we have such a responsibility, and that's what I really feel on my shoulders. I've taken my own kid to a museum every week of his life, and I think that I would just love to have more of the public in here thinking about how we understand history and why that's important.
I think that's a great way to end it. Okay, please give everybody the address where we can find you on Instagram, where we can find you online, so we can tell everybody how to come here.
Oh my goodness, pop quiz. So we are in the Capitol Crossing neighborhood, which is 575.
Really good restaurants all around here. I will tell you where to eat when you come here. Go ahead.
Our address is 575 3rd Street Northwest in DC. Our email address is info@capitoljewishmuseum.org.
Okay.
And then I have to be honest, I don't know our other handles.
That's okay. I'll handle that. I'll put it all in the show notes. So everything you heard here today, you can find, of course, on the listoryouwantit.com. You're going to follow me at NYCCINELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You are going to subscribe to YouTube so you can watch the show and, of course, listen to it on your walks. So many amazing things going on in this city. The Capitol Jewish Museum is one of them. If you haven't had a moment to come here, I highly, highly recommend it. This was just a small example of everything that is happening here. And maybe I'll come back when that deli exhibit is here, because I feel like we should have food in front of us and do a whole thing. Anyway, I want to thank you all for joining me today on Industry Night. It's good to be back. Anything else? No, I think that's it. Have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.